Think about what happens when a test score begins to define a person. I'm a C student with 100 IQ, as if it's indelibly stamped on the forehead. Does that kind of labeling then become a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Or can generally held beliefs about a person's gender, race, or age influence a person's performance? Psychologist Claude Steele of Stanford University studies the effect labeling and stereotypes can have on a person's ability to perform in a given situation. He calls this phenomenon stereotype threat.
Stereotype threat it is a situational threat. It's usually tied to the social aspects of the situation you're in, and it's just the sense that you could be judged in terms of some stereotype about an identity that you have, your racial identity, your age, your sex.
We don't have to believe in a stereotype. Merely knowing that others could judge us because of our social identity is enough to distort our performance. One of the pivotal studies Steele conducted was testing women's performance when compared to men on standardized math exams.
There is in our society a stereotype that women have a limited ability to perform especially difficult math. And so a woman taking a difficult standardized exam in math, when she experiences frustration, that stereotype becomes relevant as a possible interpretation of the frustration, both for her and for anybody who's going to see or interpret her performance. And that makes the experience of taking the test different for her than it does for a man in precisely the same situation.
Hi, are you two here for the psych study?
Our interest there was to see if you brought women and men who were both very skilled in math and very dedicated to being good at math into the laboratory and you gave them a very difficult math test, how would they perform? Our prediction was that the women would not perform as well as the men because they would be under stereotype threat. The men wouldn't be in this situation. And that's exactly what happened. Our prediction is that if you could turn the spotlight of stereotype threat off, their performance should go up to match that of equally skilled men in this situation. We take the threat out of the situation in a very simple, straightforward way. Just before people get ready to take the test, we sit them down and say, on this particular test, this is not a test that's capable of discriminating between men and women's performance. It never has, it never will. The stereotype is now almost magically made irrelevant to her performance here. And when we create that situation, women's performance goes up dramatically on this test to match that of equally skilled men in this situation. So that's the kind of evidence we use to give us a sense of how this process, the stereotype threat phenomenon, just being subject to being seen that way, can actually affect a very important performance in a person's life.
In the view of Alfred Binet, intelligence is a dynamic cognitive process. But unfortunately, many of the psychometricians who followed have seen intelligence as a single trait, which is accurately measured by intelligence tests and which can predict certain kinds of academic and vocational performance. In the last few years, however, cognitive scientists like Howard Gardner of Harvard have given us new perspectives on intelligence.
The theory arose because of dissatisfaction on my part with the view of intelligence as being just one thing, which you could measure with an IQ test. And if you look around the world and you think about all the different kinds of things that people can do well and that are valued in different cultures, one seems pretty simple-minded. And after a lot of analysis, I came up with a list of 7 intelligences. The first one is linguistic intelligence. It's a kind of ability that a poet or writer or arter would have. Second intelligence I call logical-mathematical. As the name implies, it's what you'd find in a mathematician, logician, scientist. And it's important to mention language and logic first, because those are the intelligences which usually are featured in school in an IQ test. And if you have language and logic, you're in pretty good shape scholastically. Once you leave school, you might find that you could use some other ones instead. And that's where the other 5 intelligences come in. There's musical intelligence, which is what you would find in a composer, performer, someone who can think musically. Spatial intelligence, the ability to think about the whole world or about the world close to you in terms of its spatial aspects. I talk about a kind of intelligence which I call bodily kinesthetic, that's using your whole body, or parts of your body like your hand or your mouth to solve a problem or to make something. Dancer, athlete, surgeon again, craftsperson would have a high degree of bodily kinesthetic intelligence. And I talk about two kinds of personal intelligence. Interpersonal is understanding of other people, what makes them tick, the kind of ability you would find in a teacher, a clinician, therapist, politician, actor. And the final kind, which is very important but difficult to talk about, is intra, or within a person intelligence. It means having a viable understanding of yourself, who you are, what kinds of abilities you have, what kinds of needs you have, what kinds of intelligences you have, and how to use those effectively to solve problems or to make something. And I think if you take those 7 into account and the particular combinations among them, you can account for most of the kinds of thinking abilities which people need to survive all around the world. We now understand from psychology and from cognitive science that people think differently. We have different strategies of learning. We have different ways of representing things in our head, different ways of acquiring knowledge. Many people feel that psychology's greatest contribution, greatest invention has been the IQ test. And certainly as far as fame and fortune is concerned, that's an accurate description. I mean, IQs are what put psychology on the map in this country. But I think IQ tests and their progeny, among which I include SAT and other kinds of achievement tests, have reached the highest point of utility that they're going to have, and I think their utility will decline in the future. I think that, to put it simply, testing has gone as far as it can. We need to move to a much broader view of assessment, which is much more in touch with the actual thinking processes of the individual, and which yields information which the teacher, the school district, and the student himself can make use of to have more successful learning in the future.